Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host. Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Good. I'm sure you worked real hard, studied about current events, and know all about this election going on. And I just wonder if anything much has really changed. So we're going to pick your brain today about that.
That'll be a quick thing.
Well, I did. I watched a good bit of it.
The debate, yeah.
But I was anticipating, well, I have to see when this section comes up. You know, I think it was a 2-hour thing.
Yeah.
And I was waiting for the subject of foreign policy to come up. But I waited to the last 10 minutes, and I said, if the next word is not dealing with foreign policy, I'm giving up on it. So I doubt if they ever mention anything about foreign policy. But of course, the whole thing was, had nothing to do with a debate. Because if they had an important issue, whether it's foreign policy, monetary policy, deficits, financing, the welfare state, the warfare state, corporatism, and that never came up. The only thing I could see in this whole thing that came up was who got to pass out the loot. It was an argument for who gets to write the checks, and we have a commander-in-chief for the military, but the name I'd like to give them, what they're arguing for, is the plunderer-in-chief, because that's what they're doing. They talk casually about trillions and trillions of dollars. Well, they don't have to pay their bills back here. Everything is free, and no matter what the problem is, but they want to be in charge of it. And of course, the one question they don't ask, and never ask once, is does this affect anybody's rights to pass out so much? And how's it going to be paid for? Totally irrelevant. And they never even mentioned the Federal Reserve. Can you imagine that? They didn't bring that up. So it was the usual stuff, and it was a little bit expected. The one thing that crossed my mind as I was watching, because there was a lot of junk going back and forth. A song came back to my mind. It said, "Where are the clowns?" They send in the clowns. And then the next line in the lyrics is, "Don't bother, they're here." And I thought, well, that might be pretty appropriate. It was terrible. And one time it was going back and forth. I'm pretty sure I remember this correctly. Bloomberg wasn't getting, they didn't give him time, but he didn't do much with it when he got it. But he was sitting there rather quiet, and they were going back and forth and back and forth. And he looked over, he said, "You know what?" He says, "If the more people hear this," and he points to him, of your discussion, the more votes Trump's going to get. And I thought, well, all of a sudden he said something very, very accurate, probably.
Yeah, that's true. And there's really a quick debate summary. Class warfare. Bloomberg is terrible because he's so rich. He's terrible. Accusations of sexual harassment. Warren's sort of unhinged, breathless attacks on him constantly. The racism, stop and frisk. Some of this stuff is legitimate, but it was just attack after attack after attack. And I sort of had the feeling that the other candidates were grateful because they finally have someone else that they can all hate in addition to Trump.
Yeah.
And that's what it felt like. And, neither of us are fans of Bloomberg. He's an absolute authoritarian. But you almost kind of felt sorry for him. The others were so bad, he almost looked good by comparison, just kind of sitting there and keeping his mouth shut.
The whole thing is socialism is a big issue, and they don't accept the principle that there's a lot of definitions, a lot of variety, and for me, what they're talking about is authoritarianism. You solve your problems in a voluntary way in a free market or a system designed for freedom, or is it the authoritarians doing it? And then this so often leads to some form of socialism. And I happen to think that, you can spot which way they're going. And I think the socialism, the authoritarianism of Bloomberg sends them more to a fascist state.
Yeah.
And I think what Sanders is doing, it would be more of a traditional communist state. But, Bloomberg mentioned that, and oh boy, Sanders didn't like that at all. You're calling me a communist. You're calling me a communist. And, in a way, I don't think Bernie actually visualizes that he would like to instill Soviet communism in this country. But that's beside the point. It's what you endorse, the principles you endorse, and what direction you go. And he wants people to stop calling him a communist. Socialist is okay. But I would say, in a way, we shouldn't call him, we should qualify. We shouldn't infer that Bernie Sanders actually believes in Russian communism, the Soviet system. But we could agree not to do that if he would agree, and all of them, you make this mistake, they blame free market capitalism for everything. And I highly resent it. We've talked about this a lot, that the problems we have is capitalism, which a term I don't work, but in a way they're inferring too much freedom, too much free enterprise, and we have to stop that. So they do exactly what they complain about. They're called communists, but then they also say that what we have to do is stop what we have because we hate capitalism and freedom and too many choices, and we have to save the people from themselves, and that's why you need this. But if they had to answer the question, how much authoritarianism, how much force, how many guns do you need to collect all this money and to, police the world? It's the worst police state in the world on what they're talking about. But no, they're not going to think in their terms because they see themselves in many ways as godlike. They're going to solve social problems, economic problems, and they're certainly not bashful with solving the world's problem. So it's all authoritarianism with the use of force, and it's unlimited as far as the government is concerned. It's only the people that misuse guns and violence. It's never the government. The government never makes a mistake when they're using guns.
And also the people who drink too big of sodas. They're also the
there
enemy.
you go.
But our good friend Robert Wenzel, I think, has one of the best quotes about the debate. He said, "This was all about candidates sparring over details of various interventionist programs. Perhaps it became most absurd when the six statists debated the so-called differences between socialism, communism, and capitalism, as if they knew."
Yeah, they pretend, but I generally try to avoid some of those terms because there are so many variations. It's interventionism I use at times. But the other one is the authoritarian. They pretend they're not authoritarians. They want to bring freedom and justice to the people. But if you looked at what the Democrats were doing in this recent Russiagate squabble and the impeachment, I don't think they were much interested in justice before the law. So we have a long way to go on that. But I do think that the analogy, when you look at that there's a bunch of clowns there, but I think they're dangerous clowns, and this is something that will not solve the problems. They do not ever talk about the concept of liberty or the purpose of government. That wouldn't even have crossed their mind. It would have been pretty neat if somebody would have popped up a question. What do you think the purpose of government ought to protect liberty and not run the world, run the economy, and tell people how to drink Coca-Cola and all these things? Is that what the purpose of government is?
Yeah, one interesting way of measuring popularity, of course, polls are interesting and they can all be manipulated. But there's kind of a better way in some ways, which is the skin in the game, which is looking at the betting market, the futures market on the different candidates. We actually have something we saw on Zero Hedge today, if we can put up that first chart. It's kind of interesting, and it shows the strength of Sanders, and this is, a continuous rise of Sanders from October, and here he shot up after the debate, and look what happened to Bloomberg. He shot way down after the debate, and that's the orange. The dark orange is Bloomberg, And just below Bloomberg, you can see Biden and Buttigieg sort of duking it out. And you see Buttigieg taking a hike. Biden has had precipitous fall from late in December. So that looks about where we are. It looks like Bloomberg's bubble has burst. It was an artificial bubble anyway that I think the press, the media, and the elites blew up. And then it's been, destroyed, I think, in last night's debate.
The way they approach this, they assume that they can fool everybody all the time. But I think just a reasonably knowledgeable 12-year-old might ask the question, how do you pay for this?
Yeah.
How do you pay for all this free stuff? And of course, they never talk about that. And the one thing they don't talk about, and they probably don't have a good understanding about it, because they believe that they can just redistribute wealth and everybody's going to be happy. Not realizing that with the monetary system we have and what they want to do and have wealth taxes, they destroy wealth. They destroy wealth. Not only do they destroy the wealth that's already been created by redistribution, but they also destroy productivity.
Yeah.
Because people who have created a lot of wealth, why are they going to continue to do it? They're going to quit. The tax codes, when they make them sharp, Sanders have, oh no, I don't want to make everybody, equal to $20,000 a year. We'll have a cutoff. We would never take all their money from them. But what if he gave a number, and it's pretty low when you're talking to a billionaire, but they never want to understand the ramifications of this. And they, in their own minds, they believe that they are creating economic justice. But I would think if you look into the individual lifestyles of most of them, I mean, Sanders doesn't live in a tent, and yet he's still a bleeding heart, and the scheming that they do, the maneuvering and the lying and the fibbing, it's just. Clown is much too nice a term for them. They're not clowns. They're evildoers because people who use government force, illegal, to take from one person to another, they're plunderers. They're committing theft, and they never get charged with that. And they should be forced to someday explain why is it that if I go to person A and take half of what they have and give it to person B who doesn't have anything, and if he doesn't cooperate, I either shoot him or put him in prison.
Yeah.
What kind of society is that? Why should anybody go to work? It's so sad they don't look at the principle. They look at how wonderful they are because they're compassionate people and they're doing this, and it's all going to be better because look at what freedom has done to our country. Of course, we've talked so often about all this compassion in foreign policy, compassion with monetary policy, compassion with debt, and they've turned that around, and they're going to blame anybody who talks about liberty that we are guilty for the conditions we have. But not too many conservatives will talk our message.
Yeah.
They sort of fall into the trap. Well, no, it's not exactly that, and you have to do this. But they will not ever admit that that these conditions were created by government. And they say, well, look at what free market medicine has done. That is so disgusting. Yes, it's a mess, and there's monopolies, and we have corporatism, and yet they still say that is why we have to have one-party payer, and socialize it all, and everything will be fair, and the costs will go down because they won't have to fill out so much paperwork. It's so much demagoguery.
Well, this is something, there's going to be people, some of our friends on the progressive side are going to criticize what you just said. But here's the thing that they're never going to want to admit, which is, okay, all of these candidates accuse Trump of being an authoritarian. He's a bad, horrible guy. But everything, as you pointed out, everything they say and do is at least as authoritarian as Trump. They are authoritarians. And I think, the progressives hopefully will wake up to that and start understanding that.
I remember early in the last campaign in 2016, and Trump was just barely involved, and they asked me what I thought, and I said, well, he comes across to me as an authoritarian, and because he's been doing his businesses and things, and that needs a strong, a strong message. And he does, get involved, and he uses it. So that's the reason why the whole group, except for our 12 friends up there, they're all authoritarians, and they love it. They love it, and some are worse than others, and some are worse on economics, and some are worse on monetary. Or they're all bad on monetary policy, and some are bad on medical policy. But I didn't hear any talk about this. The reason we have this mess and this maldistribution of wealth, it's due to the monetary system. It's designed to do this. And of course, corporatism, you bail out the rich, which the liberals would say, no, they shouldn't do that. And, even Bernie would agree with that position. But he just wants the authority in his pocket, in his hands, and he will design it and know who really deserves the free stuff. And this whole thing about free stuff, the old saying about there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. And there is no such thing as a free stuff program. And I think that's why all you have are a bunch of clowns up there, because they're not talking about the problem. The country is morally bankrupt and it's financially bankrupt. The foreign policy is bankrupt, and yet they're just feeling their way, and nobody wants to admit the truth, how precarious the situation is. But it will become known soon, and they'll probably blame it on a virus. The virus caused all the trouble.
That's right. Well, I've had lunch in some of those communist lunch kitchens, and it may be a free lunch, but it doesn't taste very good. I'll be honest with you. But the fact is, as you started out the show saying, there was no meat in the campaign. There was no substance. Here's what Peter Van Buren, he's been at our conferences. He's a friend of ours. Here's what he wrote today, and I think this captures it all. Not a word about foreign policy, China, North Korea, Iran, nothing. Nothing about the Department of Justice, nothing about impeachment. Few specifics about anything, not the least of which was health care. And then he said, you all think you're going to beat Trump like that? Dems, come get your people. And I read that, and I'm thinking, why was there no substance? Well, I'll tell you one reason why. There's no Tulsi. They wouldn't let her. She'd been drawing crowds everywhere, crowds everywhere. Bloomberg hasn't drawn a crowd anywhere. But somehow he gets in, and she, who's out there beating the streets, talking to people, she's not even allowed to participate. The whole thing smells rigged.
We have to be pleased, though, that Biden and his son was brought up. But lo and behold, he brought it up, defended his son, and nobody said one word about it. He's an angel. And Biden himself brought it up, and it was, like it was all planned out. Like, if I do that and all this, their strategy, they're already talking about how are we going to bring these clowns together, and they're going to have a job. But I think that Trump, politically speaking, will probably be able to handle them. But I don't know if he can handle every event between now and then. But it's already almost getting too late for a major crisis hitting, and Trump suffering the consequences. Usually it takes months or a year to say, Trump caused this to happen, because everything doesn't come down in 24 hours. But it could. There still is a possibility that it exists, that there's some event out there. But Trump's been pretty smart. I mean, he laid the foundation for blaming the Federal Reserve to do the wrong thing. And he'll blame the Federal Reserve for not doing enough of the wrong thing. And so they have their ways of blaming others for their problems. But this is not going to go away. I think the crisis is too big. It's this monetary debt crisis, every single day. And we've talked already several times now on the budget. And they didn't express any problem at all with the budget, but a lot of free stuff if you need it. And did they ever question, well, if we write off the debt of all the students, are we offending those people who borrowed the money in good faith and worked 2 jobs and paid it off? Of course, what we could do is just vote to back pay them or something like that. That's probably what they'll do.
It's all funny money. I mean, I think only Trump can really defeat Trump, and he's doing a good job, because he looks a little unhinged with his tweeting and this and that. I mean, he's his own worst enemy when it comes to this. But I'm going to close by changing the topic a little bit, and this is something that we've been talking about, and actually now it's live, and that is our conference on May 23rd in Houston. You can put up that first graphic. Here's the first graphic, please. Here is our poster about the conference, and it's all about speech. Shut up, cancel culture, and the war on speech. On the campuses, in social media, in government, in society, the idea that if you don't like something, you don't just avoid it, you try to cancel, you try to get the person to shut up. This is what we're going to talk about. And here's how you can get your tickets. It's a half-day conference starting at 8:30 with breakfast, coffee and tea throughout the morning. We finish at 1. It'll give you the afternoon to enjoy Houston and its great dining opportunities. Just go to the Ron Paul Institute website, ronpaulinstitute.org. You see that up in the upper right-hand corner. Click on that picture or the headline. It'll take you to the site where you can read more of the details, the rationale behind the conference, and how you can get your tickets. Folks, these tickets are very, very cheap, $45, and you get a nice buffet breakfast. So this is not a huge investment to go and listen to some great speakers. We're going to make some announcements on the speakers soon. But trust me, these are people who are right out there in front on these very, very important topic of the war on speech, the most fundamental thing and fundamental value we have.
Very good. You know, last night's debate, I don't think ever has resolved anything yet, because the real factor in competition with the whole crowd there would be Trump. But in that crowd and what they were doing, and I said in our little talk here today, is they're talking about who gets to be the plunderer in chief, who gets to take from one and give to another, and who's the one to promote the propaganda and a philosophy of authoritarianism and redistribution of wealth with guns from the government. And that is what's going on, and I don't see any easy way out. I think it's going to get much, much worse. I think we'll go through this charade of an election. I've said it so many times that politics really isn't the place where you solve the problems. The problems are solved when it's the people have a prevailing attitude and they demand that they want the results of living in a free society. Today, it's really scary when you see that the lead plunderer in that group last night is Bernie Sanders. I mean, if it's true, we're in a bad state of affairs. I don't think it's that bad, to tell you the truth. And the one way is, I'm always looking for a positive. Well, you know, I argue that we're not all of a sudden going to change the Congress and they're going to do all these wise things and we're going to get rid of the Fed and we're going to bring our troops home. But in the midst of a crisis, if you have enough people thinking correctly about what the proper role of government ought to be, then there's a chance that we could, you know, make massive improvements, you know, in the monetary system and principles of liberty. So there is a chance, but right now, you know, we don't know which way it would go. I do remember the 60s very well, and the tragedy of the deaths and destruction perpetrated against the Vietnamese and American people and our American soldiers. You know, it ended not because all of a sudden we had wise people in the State Department. It was finally the demonstrations here at home, and the people said enough is enough. This war has to end. And finally they got Congress to say, they knew the message, and they quit funding the war. And that is what's going to happen. But our job is try to present to the best of our ability the truth of what's happening, so that when that opportunity comes, that we know what we must ask for and move and promote and work for. And of course, for us, it's very easy. It's a free society where people have responsibility and individual sovereignty is honored, and everything is voluntary. If you don't hurt people, you can do what you want. You can ruin your own life if you're capable. But trusting the government to take care of us, whether it's health care or education or anything else, believe me, there is no reason to place trust in those bureaucrats and those clowns who want to be president. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.